Welcome to this EDUcast, ear-to-ear diagnostics, true end-to-end knowledge, sponsored by Nectar Services and Telecom Reseller. Today with me is Tim Armstrong, Vice President, Product Marketing at Nectar Services. And as we always do, we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about. We have an agenda today. We're going to contrast VoIP and UC in the management strategies, what issues are faced by those who are trying to do the diagnosis, and why we need a platform, not just a network. Discussing things like end user quality, and then moving on to effective management, not just management. Then we're going to deal with tools and their focus, and then finally, how do we deliver ear-to-ear management? So let's start off, Tim, with our first question. What has caused management strategies to change? Are there new requirements for UC that we did not have with VoIP?
Hey, Gary, thanks so much for the question, and thanks for having me on today. Now, I really think that this really gets to the core of the issue today, is that, you know, obviously voice quality and video quality and the things that have always been important in our industry are still important, but the fundamental technology has shifted so much that, you know, what we've found is that there really is a new management approach that needs to accompany that shift in technology. And it used to be that when a telephony platform was deployed, it was more or less self-contained. Convergence and VoIP, you know, VoIP changed that in a way because we became reliant on a shared network. But even so, we still had quite a bit of control over the platform and the endpoint. And you know, what I would say is that, you know, today it's really necessary to look at it across what I call three separate UC health domains that very often have different management approaches and requirements, and that being the platform itself, you know, those servers or services that are offering the UC services, the network, and then finally the endpoint, which used to be easily controlled and is now very frequently out of the control of IT and requires a completely different management approach than it used to when that used to be a phone on a desk.
In your experience, what have been the issues that you see UC teams most often have to resolve?
Yeah, I would say, you know, there's a couple of things. So when I see people rolling out UC, there's two approaches that I see. I think you can put most strategies into one of two camps. One of them is what I call PBX replace, and then the second one is new world of work. And depending on which of those you are pursuing, it does really change the issues. So let me just kind of explain what I mean by those real quickly. So a PBX replace is when we're putting in a UC platform, but still expecting to use it in much the same way we would have, you know, a traditional PBX or a VoIP PBX. In other words, we put phones on desks. You know, we think a lot about, you know, PSTN, inbound and outbound calls. We think about kind of traditional telephony use, but leveraging the UC platform. So that's a PBX replace scenario. The second scenario is new world of work, and new world of work is when, you know, an organization adopts UC because they want to fundamentally enable a different user experience. They want to enable you know, remote work from home or work from client sites, or, you know, kind of a much more mobile friendly experience, and they're really trying to divorce themselves from the idea of having a you know, a phone on a desk and a person tied to that. And so depending on which one of those things is more important to a deployment, I see different challenges. But fundamentally, it comes down to what the user experience is. You know, whether that person is having a, you know, good voice quality. So when we think about traditional QoS and just voice quality, that is always important and remains important. But now it's much broader when we talk about user experience. It's not just do my phone calls sound good? It's, do I have trouble joining a meeting, you know, in these scenarios? Do I have you know, experiences where I have to, you know, try and join a meeting multiple times, or where I'm in a conference room and I can't get the conference room to work how I, you know, want it to? Or is my software up to date? Are my security certificates up to date? There's so much variability given to the user that it really creates a you know, kind of a much harder to manage scenario for a lot of enterprises today.
We've mentioned the word platforms multiple times. There are a number of platforms on the market. How are they implemented? How has that changed? And what are some of the characteristics of what you might call a modern UC platform?
There's no such thing as a single vendor UC deployment today, at least in my experience. I see very, very few of those. Just about every scenario is multi-vendor. And then on top of that now, the architectures are calling for different role-based servers, and that, there's a lot of options, a lot of variabilities in different deployments. What I'm looking at on a front-end server is very different than what I look at on a mediation server. And so you need to have an approach for that. And then, of course, you need to understand what is the infrastructure that's running on? Is it hardware and virtual, and what are the implications of that? And it's not just about virtual machines anymore. It's really now also about virtual networking and understanding how, if you're in a VMware environment, how the switch planes are configured, and that whole virtual networking piece of it adds a lot of complexity to this. At the end of the day, this is just a tremendous amount of data that we're capturing, and you end up with really, really massive data stores that have implications both on performance and management, but now, of course, also have implications on things like compliance, GDPR, etc.
This slide intrigues me. We talk about the network as a challenge. I thought networks have become a commodity. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think I love talking about this because, our industry for a long time, since, we got into this idea of convergence in VoIP, we spent 20 years focused on the network, right? We spent 20 years making VoIP work on the network. And it's not that we don't still face network challenges, we certainly do, but the reality of it is that between the ubiquity of, really massive speeds and the fact that the codecs and the way in which the vendors have transcoded the traffic, we've really minimized kind of the impact of the network, and we've gotten much smarter, much more capable around this. So many of the UC endpoints now are Wi-Fi. Many of them are now becoming LTE or kind of mobile enabled, right? And so you combine that with the fact that even an internal user could be connecting to your platform over the public internet. You've got a lot of different fronts to manage. And then in the data center, you've got the complexity of the virtual route switch environment that I talked about. What we find is that the network, while it is important, it plays a role. There's really so many other components to a UC end user experience. And
I've used VoIP for well over a decade, and a lot of times I'm not happy with it. How do we, satisfy the end user? Talk about the end user environment for us.
I think now is the endpoint environment is where the most need is, and that's certainly where I see a lot of enterprises asking for help.
You're leading up to an approach that is more than a tool. What's the difference between a platform and a tool?
It's to me a tool, and I do like the idea of having the right tool for the right job, and we're very focused on that. But the reality is that the UC environment in any given enterprise is much more complex than what a vendor tool will often bring you. And so just about every vendor that provides UC has tools available. What we find is that that's not going to meet the needs of most enterprises. Most enterprises need a platform that they can build on top of, that they can customize to specifically fit their needs. And whether you're a managed service provider or an end user customer, you need to be able to customize it to work with your environment, because everyone approaches these things differently. Some people are more reactive, some people are more proactive, depends on how you're staffed. But fundamentally, you need to make sure that you've got a tool that can be modified. And so in our case, we really refer to that as a platform approach rather than just a tool approach.
You mentioned the word framework, all right, on the previous slide. Would you go through what a good framework requires to be effective in UC management?
If you think about any particular user session, any session, whether that's voice, video, conferencing, PSTN, really anything, traverses 3 distinct domains. And these domains are important not just because it helps us isolate where there are problems, but it's also important because there are different people that are typically responsible for the infrastructure in these domains. Very often we are brought in and we're talking to the UC platform team. And what this slide, I think, helps demonstrate, and what this framework helps demonstrate, is that if a full UC management approach requires a holistic approach that looks not just at the platform, but also really understands what the role and implications are of different network choices, and being able to really diagnose much more deeply what's happening in the network. It's now I'm using potentially a laptop, potentially an iPhone, potentially an iPad, potentially an Android device, potentially any number of different things, and I've given the user so much more control over that environment. And it could be a BYOD device, it could be a corporate managed device, it could be something sitting in a conference room. All of that adds a tremendous amount of management complexity, and if you don't treat it as its own domain and really put some discipline around that as a domain, I think that you'll continue to struggle. So this framework, I think, really helps people understand where we've got challenges in our environment and where we can invest to improve the user experience.
I notice on this slide you have 3 categories: monitoring, diagnostics, and reporting for management. Would you go through each one of them briefly for us?
To me, this is important because not only do we sometimes confuse the nomenclature and the terminology that we use in the industry. Sometimes if I say dashboard, you might think reporting. If you say reporting, I might think that's diagnostics, vice versa. So I think it's number one important that we identify the workloads and realize that these are different scenarios that we want to enable as a UC management platform. And I think what most UC operations teams and partners have to look at it this way too. They mean different things. Monitoring is proactive by nature. It's looking at a global environment. It's understanding what's happening in the system from a dashboard and high-level perspective, and it's proactive. Diagnostics is exactly the opposite. It's reactive. This is now something has gone wrong, and I want to go in and figure out what went wrong. Very often, this is driven by a bad user experience. This is driven by a trouble ticket or something that might have come in, and it's entirely a different workflow than someone who wants to monitor a global environment. And then reporting is the one that I find gets the most confused. Reporting, by definition, is historical analysis. And while it's important to look at reporting to understand where you have potentially problem trends, it's not troubleshooting. Those are 2 different things, right? It's not where you go in to find out what went wrong. It might tell you where things are going wrong at a high level in terms of maybe by location or maybe by type of user. But if you want to go in and troubleshoot, that's a different workload.
A lot of network providers are concerned about their operations connecting a customer site to a customer site or possibly the cloud. Network tools on the market are available, and they focus on the visibility of the desktop. What do you mean by focusing on the endpoint?
The endpoint is really where the user interfaces with the platform, and that could be in any number of different physical environments, right? It could be in a conference room. It could be on a phone while someone's sitting on a train. It could be it could be working from home on a laptop. It could be any number of different things. And then you end up in remote desktop environments, and that adds a whole nother layer of complexity. So there's really a lot of focus, I think, on the endpoint right now as being one of the most challenging kind of health domains for enterprise and service providers to manage. There's a couple of things that are driving that. One is that a lot of the platform is shifting to the clouds. So a lot of that kind of wrench turning that we've been doing for so many years on tweaking the platform, the servers, et cetera, that work is moving to the cloud providers, right? And so we're spending less time typically on the front lines worrying about that. We're letting the vendors take care of that because they're hosting it. I think the other thing that we talked about earlier, and I won't belabor it, is the fact that the network is becoming less of an issue. It's still an issue, but it's becoming less of an issue. The codecs are much better, and they continue to improve. Today's endpoint is the Wild West. It really could be any number of different things with any number of different types of connections and user expectations. And so that's the area that I think that enterprises are most focused on, because the industry continues to have this kind of bring your own device and kind of user enabled. Hey, you make the choice on what you want to do, and then you add to that the fact that people are doing it increasingly mobile. It's a de facto thing now, right? It's not even worth talking about because everyone seems like they're mobile all the time now, and now you kind of the ubiquity of video is also really fascinating. You see things like these hubs all over the place now in corporate environments where you have a huddle spot or a hub spot where it's a small little corner of a room where 5 people can sit on a sofa and look at a video conference, and it's no longer that video is just for the large executive conference rooms.
Not everyone in our audience has knowledge of what Nectar is. It has a history of innovation. Would you go through some of that for us, please?
This is one of the things that I do want to really emphasize is that while we are known as a tool provider, we really consider ourselves as being able to help organizations address business challenges and bring the full solution. And one of the reasons why we're so well poised to do that is because we come from this space. We, prior to Nectar, the people that really are at the core of Nectar ran a service provider, right? We were an integrator and service provider, and so we understood on the front line the pains of managing UC implementations, of monitoring UC implementations, of understanding kind of what was going on in a multi-vendor environment and how the vendor tools were not adequate, that we really needed this broader approach.
This term, ear-to-ear solution, is kind of interesting. What do you mean by that term, and why is it so important?
This gets really to the core of the end user experience and some of the things that I think are exciting about how the industry is shifting, because the reality is that the user experience is going to be driven by things that are outside the UC platform, right? You can let's take, for example, a Skype scenario. Microsoft provides a lot of telemetry from the Skype client, but the Skype client is not the actual endpoint, right? The endpoint goes beyond the laptop, goes beyond the phone, goes beyond the tablet device, and it actually lands on the user's ear. And so this is why our joint work with Plantronics is so exciting, because for the first time, what we've been able to do is provide telemetry on the user experience beyond the desktop, beyond the phone, all the way to the Bluetooth headset. The use of the headset is something that we all take for granted, but we find in high quality UC deployments is something that is not taken for granted. It is something that is paid attention to and is really critical and important for the user experience. Not only just using high quality certified headsets, but understanding the impact that the headset and the environment can have on the end user experience. So without something like this ear-to-ear diagnostics, it's difficult to diagnose problems that might be beyond the client. And so it's great to be able to bring this to market.
That's all well and good, but how do you deliver the solution?
What we're really focused on is taking out a lot of the complexity for the end user, and we really do that by addressing it with technology. So the health of the connectivity between the headset and the laptop, or the headset and the phone, is something that's not necessarily new. And in the case of Plantronics, that data has been available for some time, but it's really now just kind of the opportunity to expose that data and put it into some context. So the last meter, as we talk about it, is that distance between the laptop and the headset. So even as I record this, I'm on a Bluetooth Plantronics headset, and my connection is strong. But if I were in an environment where it wasn't strong, either because there was too much interference, there were too many other Bluetooth users, there was maybe too much distance, that's not going to show up if you go look at a Skype quality of experience record, right? Skype isn't going to know that I was having a poor Bluetooth experience. So what we've done is we've taken the telemetry from Plantronics, and we've taken the telemetry from Microsoft, and we've taken the telemetry that we collect on our own. We've put all of those three together, and we've put all of this into some context. So now was it the Bluetooth? Was it the Wi-Fi? Was it something on the network? What really was the problem? and you see that all in the context of a single call query.
When I think of the Plantronics headsets, I think of a processor on my head, not just simply a microphone and ear set. How do the UC Diagnostics for Plantronics work with the UC Diagnostics of Nectar?
When I talk to end users and they think about the cost of the headsets and just kind of what they're investing in, I really encourage them to take a look at what all is being done there, because there is a lot. And one of the things that's important for us is the ability to get this data in a seamless way. So the Bluetooth data that's connected by Plantronics is done so on a product that they call Plantronics Hub. It's then fed into a cloud service that customers can subscribe to called Plantronics Manager Pro. And so in our case, all we have to do is connect to Plantronics Manager Pro, and we get those session records, and we get the detail on what the quality of that Bluetooth session was. Now, a customer could get that from Plantronics by themselves without Nectar, but the value that we do is we give you some context for that call by doing exactly what's on the slide here, right? We show you not only that Bluetooth context, but we show you that in the context of what was going on in the network at that time. What was the client reporting back in terms of Wi-Fi issues. We're really an aggregator of a lot of different data sources, but more importantly, we correlate that in a way that's immediately actionable.
You have a diagram here that includes you and Plantronics. Would you go through this diagram and explain some of it to us?
I'm going to start in the bottom left-hand corner. These are our headset users. You can see at the bottom of the slide that they are all running a piece of software on their laptops called Plantronics Hub Client. When this is deployed with Plantronics Manager Pro, there is a specific build of the Hub Client that allows the enterprise or the service provider to really manage the desktop, the headset environment on those laptops. And that's all enabled by the Hub Client. So when a user makes a call, the Hub Client then takes the telemetry of that call and it feeds it up into Plantronics Manager Pro. And that's a cloud service that Plantronics offers around the world. On the back end of that Plantronics Manager Pro, there's an API that Plantronics invests in, and then we did some joint work with them on to take that telemetry and allow us to subscribe to it in a secure way, of course, with the permission of the tenant owner or the enterprise. So the Plantronics ODA API is what enables this on the Plantronics side, and again, that's tied to Plantronics Manager Pro. What UC Diagnostics does is it takes that same call from those same users going through a Skype session, and we use the Skype SDN API to identify all the call detail information. So Plantronics can tell you what the quality of the headset was, but they have no idea whether or not you were joining a conference call or making a peer-to-peer call. They really don't have any additional context for what that call was. They just saw the headset being used. What we do then is we correlate that with the Skype call data so that we now can give you full context. How many other people were on that conference call? Who were the other people on that conference call? What headsets did they have, etc. We give you a whole lot more rich data there. And then the third data point that we bring in is what's going on in the enterprise network at the time of that call. During a particular call, were we dropping packets because a router was oversubscribed? We can tell you that, and we can present that to you. That way, when the UC support professional does go look up that call, he or she has full context from the endpoint environment, ear to ear, from user to user, knowing all of what was happening throughout the length of the media stream.
Tim, thank you very much, and I think you've opened people's eyes to not simply a problem, but a way of resolving those problems and getting greater visibility in the user experience. There's some really good resources here I want to bring up. There's an ear-to-ear diagnostics video. There's a blog. There's the ear-to-ear blog from Nectar as well. This is the place you would go for information about Nectar Corp and what they're providing here. And thank you again, Tim, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. Great to be with you.